You might have heard about Ruby Franke, a woman who abused her children in front of millions of people. But what do we know about her husband? Let's start at the beginning. Do you guys know much about this story?
It's an all or nothing story. I know she's a YouTuber and an influencer and was, while she was, had this big channel, was secretly abusing her children and now she's in jail.
I had no context for when the story came out. I'd never heard of her. So basically in 2015, Ruby Franke, she was a mother of 6 living in Utah, began a YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. So 6 kids, her and her husband, Kevin. At its peak, the channel had 2.5 million subscribers, and the content offered an insight into their home life. Her parenting style was always very strict. For example, her 2 sons were play fighting in one video, and she told them if they kept doing it, they'd lose the privilege of eating dinner. One of her daughters was cutting things in the house, and she threatened to cut off the head of her doll. But things started to become more and more extreme over the course of this channel.
So is this at the time when those family YouTubers and they sort of documented their whole life? It's not so common anymore, I don't think, but it was huge in the mid
the kind of,
teens.
exactly. And big families. And in Utah, because of the Mormon element, there are these big families.
It feels like, not to want to make light of this story, but that Utah really overrepresents in the influencer space.
It
like
does.
a lot of the trad wives are from Utah.
Yeah.
A lot of the big families are from Utah. It must have a high head count of influencers.
It does. And physically, it's a very beautiful place. So I think that it works
harsh.
as a set.
Yeah.
Things then became more extreme. So her older son, Chad, speaking to the camera, said that his mother had taken away his bed for 7 months after he played a prank on his sibling. And since he'd been sleeping on a beanbag. And in the video, Ruby Franke was seen laughing. This then launched a petition flagging that there were signs of abuse and neglect, where they called on Child Protective Services to investigate. So that was from her followers. The channel shut down, and then Ruby Franke kind of went off. We didn't see so much of her kids anymore, but she launched a parenting advice support program alongside this woman named Jody Hildebrand. Then in August 2023, this story broke out again because one of Franke's children, reportedly malnourished, climbed out of Hildebrand's house and banged on the door of a neighbour asking for food and water. Franke and this Hildebrand woman were arrested, and 4 of Franke's children were taken into care. The eldest 2 were out of home by that point. Here's what we know about what Franke was doing to her children. She forced her 12-year-old son to do hours of physical tasks, often outside. It resulted in serious sunburn that blistered. He was denied food. And after attempting to run away, his hands and feet were regularly bound. Similar punishments were inflicted on her daughter. There are more horrific details that I'm not going to outline here, but Franke was ultimately charged with child abuse and will spend 4 to 60 years behind bars, which I think it will be around 30. This has led to a lot of reflection and potential law reform when
Where
it
was
comes...
the dad? Where's Kevin?
I have often wondered this because he has evaded a lot of scrutiny. They were separated by that point, and he had not been living with Ruby Franke for about 13 months before this happened, and it is understood that the abuse really stepped up in that time.
And he hadn't seen the children
And
during
he
that
hadn't
time.
seen the children, but a lot of the strict behaviours and also having the children on a YouTube channel.
The YouTube channel involved him.
Exactly right. But over the weekend, Kevin Franke spoke about his regrets. And he said that he is petitioning for a bill whereby a child claims a percentage of money made off their image and also can demand as an adult that the content made of them be removed.
You would assume that that was already the case, but I guess it's just not in law.
No,
It
it's
is
not.
in some countries. So this is part of the whole reckoning around, this kind of influencing that involves children. And there are some countries where 10% of the income has to be put aside in some kind of trust for a child, and they want to try and pass a similar law in some of the states in America, which is why this guy
has come out. But Holly, I wondered when I saw this, are we conflating 2 issues here? Because one is the YouTube element, but is this actually a story about vlogging, or is this a story about something else entirely?
I know.
Child abuse.
I think this story gets misrepresented a lot because I'm probably typical of some outlouders who aren't massively familiar with the Frankes, in that I've seen these headlines around a lot, and it's been very much cautionary tale about putting your children online the toxic side of influencing and parent influences. But what we're talking about here, some of the abuse that you outlined before, the stuff that Ruby Frank actually got arrested for and is serving a significant jail term for, as she absolutely should, that was not on the internet. Do you know what I mean?
No.
That is child abuse of the highest order. And it's not like she was putting that up on YouTube. There is a world of difference between the kind of stuff that she was famous for. And I think we should be really clear about one of the reasons why this, I think, is so shocking, in inverted commas, to people, is that Ruby Frank, certainly at the time of her fame, she doesn't look like an abusive parent, in inverted commas. Obviously, I'm not saying that, but that's the world's perception. She was very well-groomed white lady with the nice bob and the beautiful home and all the beautiful children. And there's that aspirational element that people buy into. But she was known, as you said, Jessie, for being quite strict. But there is a world of difference between the kind of stuff she was putting up on YouTube, which was stuff like, my daughter forgot her lunch today. The teacher called me, but I'm going to let her go hungry to teach her a lesson.
Let them.
Yep, that's a let them. And also some people would say that's good parenting, like resilience, consequences. etc. There is an ocean of difference between that and keeping your child restrained in a secret room in your house. And I think that in a way, the headlines and the beautiful blonde lady and the parent influencers sort of finger wagging is like almost trying to convince people that that's what was happening and we were all bought into it. But they're two different things, I think.
Do you think this has much to do with YouTube and sharing images of your children online? Because it's almost like people are trying to suggest, see the type of people that profit off their children. I wonder if there's an element of that.
I wonder if you guys are feeling defensive because you've profited off your children in some of your content. No, I'm joking. But I think that it's to me, I didn't read it like that. To me, I read it that it was more, it's all lies. And we suspected that it was all lies. And that's why I think there's glee, which is it all looks so, whether it's Ballerina Farm or any of the other influencers, Nara Smith, it all looks so picture perfect. But underneath the surface, there's terrible, dark things happening. And it's like there's a glee, which is we knew it couldn't be as good as it looked.
I think it's also almost a true crime element of There Were Signs.
Yeah.
So it's the online detective.
The idea that it was happening under everyone's nose.
Yeah, because there were the sort of little things which, as you say, taken out of context, don't look. You kind of go, oh, that's a bit harsh, but it's not a crime. But I worry that it will embolden the commenters and embolden the kind of online community that we all know can be. I remember sharing an image of Luna when she was a few months old and a comment basically suggesting that it was my fault she was so little because I wasn't feeding her properly. And this is the thing about like people watching any of your parenting is that they're going to have an opinion about it.
But aren't we learning that from this generation of kids who were put on the internet by their parents? And I should say none of us knew what we were doing. Like it just so happened that my kids escaped that era. But had they been born a few years later or some of them a few years earlier, I would have done the same thing. Because it's like if you're someone who lives online and part of the content that you make and monetize is about your life, you can't just pretend you don't have children. So I get that. But I think that what we're seeing now is that those children are old enough to go, hey, you know that thing, that wasn't good for us.
Yeah, but I reckon that we are unable to see this as a spectrum. We have become so black and white about sharing an image of a child online that it's like you share an image and you're traumatizing them for life.
Yeah.
There is a spectrum where it's like sharing a family photograph, child appears in video. Making your children work full-time for your content and filming them at their worst moments when they're crying or tantruming or whatever, like they are totally different things, and we seem to not understand that it's not the same.
Ruby Frank's daughter, who has written a memoir and who is also talking in this court case that her this sort of this push to get this bill passed in Utah, which her dad is too, is very vocal about the fact that she feels very exploited. And she said, her mum would film her bra shopping and put that online. She'd put all kinds of very sensitive teenage stuff up there. And I think without question, Mia, you're right that there is a generation who've grown up and said, hey. But as Jessie says, I don't think that's the same as somebody who just sometimes puts a picture of their kid up.
No.
But I mean,
you're right, it's a spectrum.
To your barb earlier on, which is fair enough, about the, do you feel defensive? I think I probably do feel defensive. Not in any way do I feel like I want to defend a person like Ruby Frank who's abusing her children in the worst way possible. But I do want to be a little bit defensive about the idea that ever involving your children in online content is necessarily entirely negative. I don't think that's true. I think one of the reasons, I think it feeds into one of the reasons why the where are the dads question is interesting, which is the people who are consuming very often a lot of parenting content on the internet are women. They're looking at other women doing it. And although it very often starts off with I feel seen, thank God, my house is dirty like your house is, my kid won't eat vegetables like your kid won't eat vegetables, it also always morphs into a big stream of judgment, a big stream of like, well, that child's top does look a bit dirty and you're not feeding your child properly, Jessie, and whatever. And I think that that's very toxic for the parent involved. And we know that if the child is exposed to that, that's terrible. But I don't think that everybody who's doing that on the internet isn't considering the outcome.
No. I mean, of course, many of them are. You would hope that this is a bad apple kind of situation. But I think what's interesting also is part of this bill is that when the children become adults, they can request that all that content about them is taken down. And what I think that it speaks to is when we have children, we feel that their experiences are our experiences, and at what point do they become their own experiences? You watch people talk about whether it's a child's medical condition or their behaviour, and it's all through the lens of how it affects that person as a mother, which I completely understand. But I think what we're becoming more aware now is that that person didn't necessarily consent to that. I don't mean, when they're in their photos on the internet or they're in a little bit of sponsored content. I more mean that that kind of vlogging, turning your life into a reality show.
It's just interesting to me how this conversation has almost totally excluded fathers, as participants in their children's lives. And I understand it to a degree because it is women who post a lot of this content and women follow women. That's totally the point. But I also think that we understand women to be in charge of parenting decisions. And so I wonder if this were reversed. If there would be
gatekeepers
more
of our children's welfare.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If a child is online, let's assume, unless it's Grimes and Elon Musk, let's assume that both parents have consented to that. But the judgment is always towards the mother because it's your job to keep them safe.
I know what you're saying. I think that's slightly disingenuous in that there is, in most households and most families, there's divide and conquer. So the internet and social media and knowing about all of that is seen as more of something that women generally know a lot more about. Men on social media tend to either not be on it or they're lurkers. Men rarely post.
I don't know. I think that's a decision that you make. And if you're going to the bottom line of the family, this man, look, Kevin, there is no, there's evidence that he had absolutely nothing to do with this, Kevin Frank, in terms of the abuse.
With the worst of the abuse, yeah.
But
he was very involved in the vlogging part.
Yeah, and he's come out and obviously said that he has regrets. But I just note that at no point did everyone kind of go, well, he was also putting a camera in front of their face and also endorsing the parenting style that they were both practicing.
And there are a lot
money.
and there are a lot of dad influencers now too. They have a lot of female followers. I think this is the modern example of the stage parent, right? And there have always been extreme versions of stage parenting that have veered towards pushing your kid really hard,
exploitation,
go and pay the bills for the family, exploitation, working them overtime. This is like the dark side of that.